You stand in a room that is quiet enough to hear the small betrayals of your life, bills arriving, relationships cooled, the steady drip of missed mornings and missed promises. Imagine that quiet as a test, not a punishment. The moment when everything that once defined you collapses and demands a new measure of strength. This is the exact place where the samurai looked to sharpen not their sword, but their spirit, and where Miyamoto Musashi would say, "The true victory is in constancy, when circumstance is against you." If your life is falling apart, the mind first fractures into noise and habit, and only then can it be rebuilt into discipline through purpose, ritual, and refusal. The question is not how to climb back to what you were, but how to become a person who is unshakable by loss. Chapter 1. The awakening begins with a single modern man named Kenji, 37, whose life had been neat in the way of slow erosion. A job lost to restructuring, a marriage that cooled into polite silence, and a body asking for attention his schedule refused to grant. He woke one morning and found the apartment empty of meaning, each object a witness to the life that had been wearing thin. The awakening is not dramatic in most lives. It is a recognition that the scaffolding of identity, the job title, the routine, the social proofs, has been removed, and you must either collapse or build again. This is the moment when ancient principles become useful because they do not promise rescue, they provide form. Kenji would learn that the way forward begins with eliminating the illusions that keep you comfortable and undisciplined. Chapter 2. Embrace the Void explores a central samurai truth. In emptiness, one finds readiness. The samurai trained to be prepared for no single outcome, to remain present without clinging, and to accept uncertainty as the terrain of action. Zen and Bushido teach that stillness is active. It is a cultivated silence that lets one see clearly where to act and where not to act. For Kenji, this meant mornings of silence before the day's noise, a deliberate hour of sitting, walking, and listening to what the mind wanted to avoid. At first, the silence was accusatory, a mirror of what he had neglected, but gradually it became a workshop where he could repair attention and learn to make small, precise decisions. Chapter 3. Small, non-negotiables frames discipline not as grand gestures, but as a set of tiny, habitual actions that define a life. Miyamoto Musashi wrote about mastery emerging from repetition, and the samurai's daily rites were not glamorous. Cleaning, sharpening, steady breath. Kenji began insisting on 3 non-negotiables each morning: 1 hour of movement, a page of deliberate reflection, and a named task to complete before noon. He declared these sacred not because they were hard, but because they formed a boundary against chaos and the seduction of endless distraction. Over weeks, these actions reconstructed a sense of self that was reliable and dependable, independent of other people's approval or external success. Chapter 4. The discipline of elimination reveals another core teaching of samurai philosophy: the power of removing what is not essential. Bushido values clarity of purpose, and Musashi counseled the warrior to discard what clouds judgment. Discipline, therefore, is often less about adding more and more about cutting away. Kenji began to remove relationships that demanded emotional energy without reciprocity, subscriptions that ate attention, and commitments that were rituals of avoidance. This was not cruelty, but economy. The samurai's life is paired to the essentials so that the heart and mind may move freely and decisively. In this practice, Kenji found space to breathe, and with space came the capacity to choose. Chapter 5. Presence as a skill turns attention into the central instrument of rebuilding. The samurai's presence was not theatrical. It was the cultivated habit of full engagement with the immediate act, drawing a sword, tending a garden, speaking to a child. Presence is developed through consistent action, focusing on the breath during a task, bringing the body fully into a routine, and refusing to allow the mind to attend to more than what is necessary. Kenji practiced presence by making the simplest tasks an arena, washing dishes with complete attention, walking without headphones, answering one email at a time. Each small act became training, and presence compounded into clarity, which then became the basis for better decisions and steadier effort. Chapter 6. The Teacher. Within addresses identity and inner authority. The samurai found strength not by seeking constant approval, but by cultivating an inner teacher, a voice that knows the work and insists on it. This is discipline as identity. Not, I will do this when I feel like it, but this is who I am. Kenji began to speak to himself with the quiet firmness he had once reserved for others. He crafted statements of identity that were short, true, and actionable. He did not say, I am disciplined, as a boast, but practiced the behaviors that would make that statement accurate. Over time, the inner teacher's voice grew steady, and Kenji no longer relied on external validation to continue his work. Chapter 7. The Art of Surrender examines a paradox in samurai thought. Strength includes the capacity to surrender when needed. Surrender here is not defeat, but acceptance of what is outside control, a yielding that frees energy for the only things that matter. Zen masters taught that clinging to noise and story consumes life. The warrior learns to let go and to act cleanly from a place of acceptance. Kenji practiced surrender by accepting the loss of his old career without endless justification, and by recognizing that grief need not be an identity. This surrender opened a practical clarity. He could plan, retrain, and act without the heavy ballast of denial. Chapter 8. Systems over passion makes a quiet argument. The samurai relied on systems, rites, repetition, and ordered living, rather than the volatile spark of inspiration. Passion is fickle. Systems carry you through days when feeling is absent. Kenji established simple systems, a weekly plan, a morning and evening routine, and a rule that he would begin difficult tasks for at least 20 minutes. These rules reduced the friction of beginning and created a path through inertia. The discipline of systems turned intermittent effort into consistent forward motion, and Musashi's counsel on constant practice proved true in the mundane details of rebuilding a life. Chapter 9. The loneliness of the way recognizes that a disciplined life is often solitary, not as punishment but as requirement. The samurai walked a path that isolated them from casual comforts, so they might remain clear and honest with themselves. Kenji felt the loneliness as a refinement. It forced him to confront parts of himself he had been avoiding, and to find companionship within purpose rather than distraction. He learned to hold solitude as a mirror, and to seek community deliberately rather than by habit. In this way, discipline became less about sacrifice and more about selecting the precise company and practices that supported a steady life. Chapter 10. The return to action is where the inner work meets the outer world. The samurai never practiced in a vacuum. Their refinement was meant to be lived. When Kenji re-entered work, relationships, and public life, he did so with new metrics: constancy, clarity, and small, inexorable behaviors. He took jobs that required presence rather than prestige. He set non-negotiable boundaries in relationships, and he continued his rituals of silence and movement. The measure of progress was not applause, but the steadiness of his mornings and the absence of chaos by evening. Discipline had become a landscape upon which he could act creatively and without panic. Conclusion: the quiet victory closes with a truth both simple and severe. Rebuilding discipline when life collapses is not heroic in the dramatic sense. It is methodical, patient, and often invisible. The samurai teaches that victory lies in the ordinary repetition of right actions, in emptying what distracts, and in cultivating presence until it becomes character. Musashi's life was a study in the slow accrual of skill through unglamorous practice, and that is the exact medicine for a life in ruins. If you allow silence to teach you, if you remove what is unneeded, and if you make small routines sacred, your world will not be saved by a single act, but rebuilt by countless disciplined days.